You're welcome along to the football show. It's great to have you with us. Later on, we will bring you some of our interview with Packie Bonner from yesterday. It's a great chat. We delve deep into the childhood, the influence of his parents, meeting Jock Steen at 17, heading over to Glasgow, where he has been for the subsequent 42 years now. Packie turns 60 this week, so it was great to have him on the show yesterday. We will podcast the full interview, and a good chunk of it is on the way very shortly. But it is nice to say that we had some sport over the weekend, and that very much included football. All eyes were on the Bundesliga, and I'm very happy to say Rob Daly, who has been working in the Bundesliga as a commentator for some time now, joins us. Hi, Rob. How you doing?
Hey, Joe. Good, mate. How are you?
Very well, very well, very well. So lift off.
Yeah, I mean, it happened, and there's still one game to go. There's a game tonight between Werder Bremen and Bayer Leverkusen, but it seems so far so good. I mean, the general mood around it, certainly in terms of how the league are playing it, is certainly one of humility, because they've been given an opportunity, not just by the players and staff who are willing to give the protocols a go, but by government and the wider public. Now, I think it's safe to say that the mood and the general feeling around the return of the Bundesliga wasn't 100% of the country saying brilliant. Some felt it was too soon for football to come back. But the way they've worked, it seems to have been pretty clinical and pretty smooth. We're just every week the Bundesliga is earning its right to go again, and I think that's why no one in Germany is really shouting about it from the rooftops.
Yes, I think everybody's in a short leash just at the moment. The game which resonated over here was the Borussia Dortmund one. That seems to have been the one most people watched. They beat Schalke 4-0. It turns out Erling Braut Haaland is a very good player. Ed Woodward might have taken heed of that a little earlier. So he's doing his thing with 10 goals in 9 Bundesliga games. Quite extraordinary. Bayern Munich, top of the table. They beat Union Berlin. That's the on-the-field stuff. What about the logistics of all this? What do we know about how it worked around the stadiums, around the games?
Well, the stadiums were sectioned off into 3 different areas. People had different access to different areas. Only 10 journalists were allowed at every game and 3 photographers. So I think there was good communication, I think, between all journalists who were in attendance at the actual stadiums to share materials, because you're suddenly in a circumstance, off the back of a football game, and certainly in the Premier League, there's no end of footage and access to it at full time. But I suppose there was a case whereby if you had skeleton crews at the ground, there was a genuine risk you could lose interviews and they'd just never be seen, and missing replay angles and that kind of thing from cameramen. So I think there was a good coordination among journalists who all did get into the stadium, limited numbers. We also saw the sort of people who saw the Haaland interview, which has been cropped down to make him look a bit more brutal than he actually is. He was not bad in that interview actually overall, but was reporters had their microphones on, I think 5-meter long poles or something like that, with little sort of carrier bags over the mic shield. So all very unusual. Certainly in terms of players getting to the ground. I was covering Fortuna Düsseldorf Paderborn on Saturday, which wasn't the best. It was 0-0. But Paderborn arrived to the stadium in 2 team buses. So the starting 11 in 1 team bus, the subs in the other team bus. And if you weren't in the matchday squad, you're allowed 20 in the Bundesliga. You had to stay in your hotel room. You couldn't even just go and cheer along your teammates. So, limited number of people in a room at a time. Head coaches originally had to wear masks. They changed the rule on that. As long as they stayed away from the rest of the coaching staff, they changed that rule on Thursday. They didn't have to do that. So, the thing as well, Joe, is you do see, and you did see at the end of games, players shaking hands, just occasional moments where people forgot the scenario because they just played a 90-minute football match. But I think overall the players, everyone was very respectful of the situation.
I did see over here, it was on the back page of the Sun, a picture of Boyata of Hertha Berlin kissing his teammates. So he forgot himself somewhat.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that was an innocent moment where he just briefly forgot the scenario because, for 90 minutes, it's a contact sport. They are like thumping into each other and pulling shirts at corners and all the usual stuff that goes on. There's been there was the incident with Salomon Kalou, and I imagine you guys talked about it previously, whereby he did flout some of the COVID-19 protocol. Not only that, but live streamed himself on Facebook doing it, just to really hammer home the point, and got himself suspended by the club. But I think, if you look at the way that, Dortmund were playing Schalke, for example, the big derby, the revered derby, and scoring a goal, granted, there weren't the 80,000 people that would normally be there, but Haaland scored that goal, the opening goal in a derby, his first ever revered derby, and the players all celebrated, a metre away from each other. And, that it was drilled into them. Some of the guys have been back since April 6th. I think I was reading an interview with Achim Bayerlort, the head coach of Mainz, saying, yes, it's unusual, but some of this stuff now, after 6 weeks being back training, is second nature to us. So I think the players and the staff are getting relatively used to the new normal.
An issue which has caused concern for Premier League officials, and I'm just suspect was a potential issue for Bundesliga in advance of this weekend, is congregations of fans outside stadia. That didn't happen. They're quite relieved with that.
Yeah, they were very happy with that. And it was partly because, that there has been disapproval from the ultra groups in general in Germany to the return of the Bundesliga. That their fan culture is very much that not only are they there to support the team, but they're part of the result. And that's why sometimes if the team loses, you'll see the team captain of, say, Borussia Dortmund have to go over to the fans in the ultra end and explain themselves and discuss what happened in the game, which is quite extraordinary. So I think they felt not only was it, there's no singing, they really feel a part of the team's performance. And the issue obviously being that fans could congregate as they did outside the PSG game, for example, in the Champions League prior to the lockdown. But the ultra groups all said, let's all stay away from the game. Having extensively researched the Fortuna Düsseldorf game in particular on Saturday, that was a massive game for them, playing the team bottom of the league. They're third from bottom, the exact kind of game you'd want, home support. And they all stayed away. And I think, it's how it's played politically as well in Germany. Everything's just been very smooth. They've done relatively well in handling the virus, and I think it will stay like this to the end of the season, to be honest, Joe. I don't think we're going to see, even if Borussia Dortmund somehow won their first title since Klopp and nabbed it from Bayern on the last day, maybe you'd see something, but I wouldn't want to be trying to guess that.
And Rob, it's kind of amazing the impact that the ultras have on the team. I didn't realise that the players have to go over and have a chat with the ultras potentially in the ground. You associate that with Serie A more so than Germany. But I guess I kind of an insight maybe into that was the players in the Dortmund game at full time celebrating in front of imaginary fans at the yellow wall.
Yeah, absolutely right. Haaland was asked about that in his interview, and he was sort of like, it's obvious why we went over there. That was sort of his attitude to it. But, Dortmund was certainly one of the clubs that sort of set that precedent. I think, and I hope I'm not misremembering here, if you remember in Jurgen Klopp's last season when Dortmund were in danger of being relegated, things were that bad. And there was a point where the fans were having to go over to the captain, and everyone was having to go over to the yellow wall and speak. There's always a nominated guy with a megaphone who's sort of the ringleader, and they have celebrity status among the fans, and they're also known quite often by the captain of the clubs. I think the guy who was the announcer at Union Berlin, the guy with the sort of megaphone just getting the chants going, the players sort of gave him a guard of honour, I think, at the start of the season. So there's more of a connection perhaps than definitely than we have in England. And obviously it does happen in Italy, maybe in slightly more ferocious circumstances, like they'll come down the training ground and make how they feel evidently clear.
Rob, to what extent are the players in quarantine during the week?
Yeah, so I think that changes this week, Joe. So basically, the requirement was that basically everyone, and the other issue the mildly complicated issue in Germany is that because you've got all these separate states which do have relatively strong governmental powers, that they all had different rules on when players could come back. So before the start of the season. So, for example, in Bremen, in the north of the country, in their state, they weren't actually allowed back to training they had to go back to training much later than everyone else. And we also see with Dynamo Dresden, the team in the second tier, who have had an outbreak of COVID-19. I can't remember if it's one positive test. The Bundesliga is saying if that happens, if we get a positive test, we take that player out. They're in quarantine for 2 weeks, but the rest of the group's fine. Now, in Dresden, the local authority said, no, the whole squad has to go into quarantine. So there's all these weird situations. Largely, though, Joe, the players are all in hotels. They've all been in hotels for the past week or 2 weeks, and they are allowed back to families and everything now. I think that's happening this week. And I think that's going to be, forgive me if I'm wrong on that, and it's the following week, but I think that everyone goes back to their homes. And obviously the idea still being you're in isolation in that environment. And I think there's going to be regular 2 times a week testing or something like that. But so things are being loosened up a little bit from this week onwards, essentially.
Because in some respects, opening for the past weekend was not the major achievement. The major achievement will be staying open. Is there any deadline or announcement on the first round of testing post this weekend? Like, will we get some kind of all clear on a Wednesday or a Thursday or even tomorrow that says that passed off, relatively speaking, without a hitch? Or I guess testing and the nature of each individual is slightly different as to when they're going to show symptoms.
Yeah, and I think it was something like roughly testing twice a week. So I think it was something like some clubs were doing Tuesday and then Thursday or Friday ahead of the weekend's games. I don't know if there's set rules. Forgive me, there is a 51-page document about this stuff. Like we got sent it the other week. I was like, wow, this thing's so long about the sections of the stadium people could go into and the steps that have been taken to make sure football can go ahead clearly. But
it sounds like a page turner, Rob, I have to say.
It's riveting. I think they're just like I said, in terms of getting to the next week's fixtures, the league is having to earn it. And also, it's the optics of it sometimes. You do not want to, in the eyes of the public, look like you're, because the accusation could be about football returning. Oh, it's all about the money. You need your TV money. Everyone's greedy. That's why football wants to come back, which I don't fully subscribe to. That they need to be sensible. They need to keep the players safe. Some players have vocalized their concerns. Birger Verstetter, who's a midfielder at Cologne, who doesn't actually get much game time at the moment, but he's from Belgium, and he expressed in an interview a couple of weeks, I think, before the season started, that he was finding it a bit concerning and a bit weird that they were in full contact training, especially when his girlfriend has a pre-existing heart condition. So he was obviously going home to his girlfriend. He sort of backtracked on that. Cologne said you should have spoken to the club doctor if you had concerns, not a Belgian TV channel. He then sort of issued a half apology, and his girlfriend has gone back to Belgium. So his girlfriend isn't here for the remainder of the campaign over concerns, because let's be realistic, they're minimizing the risk of catching COVID-19, but how can you 100% guarantee somebody won't? And there have been a couple of cases at Cologne. There were a couple of youth players there who one of them wasn't available for the weekend, not match fit, because he wasn't allowed back to training for 2 weeks. So he's not as fit as everyone else. But, so far, so good. I want to say, I'm hesitant to say that, Joe, but that's the way it seems.
What about the spectacle? How diminished was it? Did people generally enjoy it? I know they got huge viewing figures. There was a pent-up demand to watch some live football. The game you watched, a 0-0 draw, for instance, was it still enjoyable in the main? Did you quickly adjust, or was it forever strange across the 90 minutes?
Yeah, no, I mean, it obviously, especially pre-match, because the as part of the 51-page document that I did go through to check this, is that how do teams come out of the tunnel, for example? And it just says the teams have to come out separately, but it's first come, first serve. So whichever team saunters into that little pre-tunnel area first just goes out first. And they're not in a line or anything. They just sort of saunter out like it is a pre-season or mid-season friendly in some mad little stadium in Spain or something. So that was unusual. And obviously you're hearing a lot more, and you're hearing the substitutes cheering things happen. But I actually got used to it relatively quickly as a TV commentator, because I was doing the game for TV. You're trying to let the game breathe a little bit, not talk as much as you do on radio, where you're explaining the ball is, and you feel the silence. The silence is agonizing when there's no crowd behind you. So you feel you have to reel off some stat about how a kid got 3 caps for Denmark's under-19s or whatever. But I tried to refrain from doing that. But then by the time I got to my Sunday game, which was a radio commentary, ironically, for Cologne Mainz, I was sort of used to it. And I was like, I'm enjoying, and it was 2-2, and I didn't find myself holding back on any of the goals going in or anything. You felt the magnitude of it. It's not the same but it's better than nothing. And I did enjoy the weekend, and I actually thought a lot of the play was good. I'll say a quick thing on the fitness as well, Joe, if you don't mind. It was funny, like, especially in the game on Sunday, when players got to the hour mark, it was like the end of 90 minutes. That's the sort of fitness level they were looking at. 60th, 70th minute was the end of a normal 90th minute. By the 90th minute, it was like the end of extra time. You know, the end of extra time when it's just stretched and there's big gaps in midfield and people can't barely move. That's sort of what it felt like. But I'm sure they'll get their match fitness back in the next, 2 or 3 weeks. I think they'll look a lot sharper.
And was it generally received quite well, or is the German press and beyond awash with articles saying this isn't real sport, this is nothing without the fans?
No. I think it received okay and well. And, the viewing figures, I think Dortmund Schalke, because I think it was on free to view on Sky Germany. I think they just put it out for free, and the viewing figures were crazy. So I think there was 6 million. Yes, that's it. So that's pretty good. And, I think always they're being so cautious about it. There's still, I think you can still find polls in some of the newspapers saying, a lot of disapproval from some about the fact the league's back at all. But given what they were trying to do and given where we are, I think they've managed it not only in a quite clinical way and looking after the welfare of the players, but also in terms of not doing this we're back, aren't we the best sort of showy thing to it. It was all relatively understated but still enjoyable, and I think that's why it's done particularly well over the weekend.
Yeah, I was reading Raphael Honigstein in The Athletic, and a few of the players made the point, actually. I don't know if you picked up on this, and it's too small a sample size after one weekend to make any definitive points about home advantage and away advantage improved without the fans and different trends in the game. But one of the trends a few of the players noted was that there were fewer debates with referees, that the very heated atmosphere, obviously, with fans when a foul happens is gone, and also there's less playing to the galleries. There's less feeling need to go over and shout in the referee's face and show everybody how much you care. Did you notice anything along those lines that not having a crowd affected?
I actually didn't. What I did notice was how many times that there were non-controversial things happening, because the Bundesliga was one of the first, and certainly of the major leagues, to have VAR. And I remember when that came in, it was like every game you were like, there were 5 big VAR incidents, and it really didn't feel like that over the course of the weekend. I suppose you could hear everything. I wonder if the players were actually, in some cases, briefed to say, look, everyone can hear what you're saying. Like you could hear basically everything that was said around the stadium on some microphone to pick it up. But that's very interesting. I hadn't noticed that in real time. But then maybe everyone was just being a bit nicer.
Maybe. I am looking forward to seeing how often you have to apologise for bad language.
We had that discussion, yeah, because you do hear, especially on the continent, and I hang out with a lot of Germans when I go over to Germany, and they do use English swearing. They do, like it. They'll do something wrong and they'll use an English word, which I absolutely love. And obviously, a lot of the languages spoken out on my pitch, even in Germany, especially with foreign players, is English, because basically everyone in Germany can speak English. So you probably could hear the odd F and Jeff, but I didn't hear any. I don't think I heard any myself. Everyone was on their best behaviour, Joe, I think, to be honest.
So to sum up, thus far, it went off relatively well as the authorities might have hoped. I presume they're all holding their breaths now to see what the ramifications are when it comes to the next round of testing of players, and they're hoping there isn't some sudden outbreak, because the optics and the logistics of that would be very difficult. And then in terms of the air of the weekend, it was non-celebratory. It was almost an understanding that there are bigger things at play here, and we're not going to gloat that we're suddenly back in business. That was how you might characterise the opening weekend of the Bundesliga, Rob. Exactly
right, yeah. And I also think the standard was pretty good. You could in terms of the actual football, I was coming into it thinking, they're going to be a bit rusty, and there was misplaced passes, and some players looked a little bit more sluggish than others. But overall, I thought Dortmund were having seen back extended highlights of that game now, they looked really, really sharp. I mean, they're a young group of players, especially in attack, they're a young group of players. So they looked really, really good. Bayern looked their usual brutal, efficient self. Cologne and Mainz played a really good game yesterday as well, the Sunday game I covered. So I think there's that as well, that it wasn't just the worry could be that you're getting preseason friendly number 1, July 1st, that kind of game where like Arsenal play Boreham Wood or something and it's all very laboured and there's 8,000 subs. The subs thing was weird, obviously, because they could have 5 subs for the first time in Bundesliga history. So that did feel unusual, the number of subs coming in. But overall, I thought it was entertaining spectacle, and I'll be watching Bremen Leverkusen tonight as well.
Okay, very good. Rob Daly, pleasure. Thanks very much.
Pleasure, Joe. Thank you.